Bienvenue tout le monde, it's Diane. Welcome back to my channel where we talk about everyday French life and beyond. I'm an American who's been in France since 2012. I blog over at ouiinfrance.com, a living abroad lifestyle blog, and I've linked that down below, so check it out. And let's get right into it with today's video. We're talking about American concepts that don't exist in France. Let's go. Okay, and before we get started, let me just say a few things. So when I say American concepts, I'm not talking about concepts that were necessarily invented by Americans or concepts that are inherently American and only exist in the USA. But being an American, these are just things based on my observations as a guest in France. So I'm not making a cultural judgment. I'm not saying these things should or shouldn't exist in America or in France. They're just things I've noticed that I'm sharing with you in case you find them of interest. Okay, so let's get into it with number one. Okay, number one, drive-through banks and pharmacies. Now, depending on where you live in the USA, a rural town, a suburb, a big city, you might not be as familiar with these as I was growing up in suburban New Jersey. But in the US, if you're not aware, it's very common to go to your neighborhood CVS, Walgreens, and to wait in line and drive through with your car and pay at the window, get your prescription in a bag, and be on your way. Same at the bank. You could make a withdrawal, you could deposit money, speak to a bank employee by driving up in your car to a drive-through window. And drive-thrus do exist in France, but at fast food franchises like McDonald's or KFC. I can't say in my experience that I've ever seen a drive-through bank or a drive-through pharmacy, but I did write a post on this on my blog that I'll link down below. And a reader did tell me that somewhere in France there was either a drive-through pharmacy or a bank. But again, this is just something that's not common in France. I could tell you, I was just visiting my family over the holidays in Florida, and in a 20-minute drive, I must have seen 2 or 3 drive-through banks, several Walgreens, CVS, that sort of thing with a drive-through pharmacy, and it's just not something you'll find here. In France, the pharmacy, and even the banks, they're more of a personalized experience, I feel. Even to get something as simple as Advil, you have to go into the pharmacy and sometimes even ask or tell the pharmacist your symptoms, and then they'll decide what medicine's right for you. You're not going to be able to just drive through a pickup window and get your medicine in France. So that's something different. Drive-through culture, again, it exists at places like McDonald's, KFC for food, but for banking and pharmacy products, you're not going to find that very much in France. This one is probably the most serious on my list, and I don't want to go into all the ethical and legal ramifications, but surrogacy is something that is not legal in France. And that goes both ways. Both if you would like to seek out a surrogacy arrangement and have someone carry your child for you, as well as being a surrogate yourself and carrying someone else's child. Both are 100% a no-go, completely illegal in France. Not only are they not reimbursed by the Sécu, but it doesn't exist. You can't go to your doctor or any type of surrogacy agency and procure that service. In the US, I believe it is unregulated at the federal level, but each state has their own legislation, with California probably being one of the safest in terms of legal ramifications for both parties. They're just the most protected. So in the US, it is something that's legal and that you can do as a surrogate or to set up a surrogacy arrangement, but not so in France. And kind of tangentially related, my husband's coworker is part of a couple, a lesbian couple. They wanted to have a child, and they cannot get pregnant in France. IVF, in vitro fertilization, is not legal for LGBT couples in France. So they actually went to Spain to get pregnant, where the service was legal, and they're now happy parents to a little baby girl. So in France, I believe that legislation is changing. Right now, for single women and for LGBT couples, you can't get IVF. It's not reimbursed. It's just not available. So at the time of making this video, IVF is illegal for couples that fall into that category, but I hope that changes. The next one is to-go coffee. In the USA, it's so common to go to Starbucks, Dunkin' Donuts on your way to work or on the way to an appointment, or just to get a to-go coffee with friends in a styrofoam or paper cup. And while it's not good for the environment, it's become very normal. And I admit, back in New York City before work every morning, I'd spend my, whatever it was, $2 to get my Starbucks hazelnut coffee, and I would sit on my desk at work for 2 hours. It was normal. But in France, places like Starbucks and Columbus Coffee are not widespread, they're not everywhere, and since I moved here, they've gotten more common, but they're not on every street corner by any means. Cafe culture is common in France. So you go and you sit down, even if it's for 10 minutes, you get your little un café s'il vous plaît, it's like a little espresso, and you people watch, or you just enjoy your coffee while looking at the morning newspaper, whatever it is. I will also mention that at bakeries in France, most of them, Paris is a separate beast. So Paris is not France, just like New York isn't the USA. In Paris, this might be the exception. But everywhere else in France, you really can't get to-go coffee from a bakery. And if you do, again, it's just not widespread. Okay, a personal display of patriotism. In the USA, it's very normal to wear flag t-shirts, flag clothes, to have a flagpole in front of your house, to display a flag on your property. Maybe it's not common, but it is something you see depending on where you live. In France, aside from major sporting events, when France was in the World Cup, the Olympics, other sporting events where people want to show their support for Team France, it's not as common to see a flagpole with the French flag, or to see people wearing a t-shirt with the French flag, or to display a flag. Outward displays of patriotism are less common in France, in my experience. Next one is doggy daycare. There are a ton of pets in France, and yes, French people go on vacation, but pets cannot always go with you. And something that I've noticed in France is that there aren't that many doggy daycare places. Now, some of you watching in Paris might say, well, Diane, of course there are. Yes, but Paris is not France. It's kind of like going to New York City and then assuming the rest of the giant country is just like New York. It's just not the case. So in France, it's the same way. You might find places in Paris that offer doggy daycare. It makes sense. But in suburban places outside of large cities in the US, doggy daycare centers are very popular for people who can't leave their pets home alone, for people who just need a little help with pet care. And it's a service, it's a business that people I know pay big money for. And in France, while I guess it's becoming a little more popular, dog walkers and websites that offer pet services, I can't say that I've, outside of Paris, really ever seen a separate doggy daycare center. And while we're on pet care for a minute, something that kind of makes me laugh, in the US, there are actually businesses that come to your backyard and scoop your dog's poop. They're waste removal services that basically exist just to clean up your yard, and people pay, I don't know, depending on how many dogs and how often they come, maybe $10 a week to come and clean up your yard. And I guess this could work for a variety of reasons. People who don't have the time, don't want to do it, people who maybe are disabled. And it's a service that a lot of people, well, maybe depends where you live, but I wouldn't say a lot of people, but it's a service that's in business in the US. And I can't say I've ever seen doggy poop pickup services in France. Boutique fitness studios. The fitness scene in France, I feel, is a little bit less developed and a little behind the American scene, especially in smaller towns. But what I mean by boutique fitness studios are places that usually have one type of workout, a specialized type of fitness activity that you pay for, either a subscription or a drop-in class. Yoga studios, cycling studios, different high-intensity workouts. So big franchises in the US exist, like Orange Theory Fitness, Bar 3, Flywheel, Cycle Bar, places like that, that even in smaller towns and suburbs are quite common, or at least somewhat well known by Americans, because you see them in shopping malls. In France, outside of Paris, there aren't a ton of fitness studios. While gyms do exist, boutique fitness studios are not in existence on the same scale. And since I moved to France 7 years ago, my town now does have a CrossFit gym and I believe a Pilates studio, so baby steps. It is growing, but the demand just isn't here outside of major cities in France, so you won't see big boutique fitness studio franchises. And I said I wasn't going to give my opinion, but as a fitness enthusiast, that does make me a little sad because I enjoy those things, but it's not the end of the world. All right, thank you so much for watching. That's all I have for you today. So let me know down in the comments if you like this video, what other things maybe I missed. And also, if you caught my bakery video, my behind the scenes video back in November, I'm doing a part 2 on the pastry side of the bakery. So stay tuned in the coming weeks. I hope to get that filmed, hopefully by the end of January. So again, be sure to subscribe. Thank you so much for being here and I'll see you next time. Salut!